He lay in a small bunk with the battery-operated lantern on the table. He looked around at all the treasures he'd collected on the farm over the years. Good morning, it is Glenda at AKA GK Frayling, and I hope you're all ready for a story today because I have one. And it is based on Justin Bennett's Elements. Okay, here we go with the story I made from the Elements supplied by Justin Bennett. And it's called Old George. At almost 40 years old, George still loved that treehouse. He thought about adding on to it. His parents passed away when he was 22, and he never thought to move from the old home. They'd been hit by an oncoming truck late at night. Some nights could be so black you could barely see the fingers in front of your face. That was the kind of night it was. George remembered well that there hadn't been any moonlight or stars visible. The fog had dipped so low, the street lights and traffic lights diffused into halos. George had stayed on the farm, but never slept in the house. He ate in the house, greeted company in the house, but he always slept and kept watch from the treehouse. He'd fall to sleep by the sound of the coyotes howling in the distance. Sometimes he'd hear a cow moo or a pig grunt, but mostly the noises came from crickets, owls, and coyotes. They make a sweet song. He knew some people thought the sounds were frightening, but they never grew up where he did. He lay in a small bunk with the battery-operated lantern on the table. He looked around at all the treasures he'd collected on the farm over the years. The handles from an old barn door he'd nailed along one beam overhead. There were old hubcaps hung like picture frames that he put magazine pages of things he thought were interesting. They didn't fit, but he was a boy when he did them and didn't care to change them now. George froze in time after the news of his parents' death. One of the pictures showed him with his date at the senior prom. He'd gone to the school prom with a girl from a neighboring farm. Her name was Molly, and she still lived down the road about half a mile. Her folks still lived at their place. He thought about the downstairs closet off the living room where his tuxedo from the prom still hung. He remembered it had been the 1980s when he'd taken her to the senior prom. He'd worn an orange three-piece tuxedo. George chuckled to himself. That thing looked so ugly now, but it was the way they all dressed then. Some of his friends had gone in powder blue, some in green, and some even in dark purple. There were the smart ones, or rather, the ones with smart parents, who wore the standard black or dark navy blue. However, he'd worn orange, and Molly had too. Her floor-length halter-top dress set off her raven curls. He'd placed an orchid on her wrist. Soon George turned off the lantern and fell asleep. Honk! He jolted away and jumped from his bed. What the heck is going on? Then he noticed the light coming through the crooked, glass-free window. He looked at his watch. Oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock already. He pulled on his jeans and the same t-shirt from the day before and scrambled down the steps of the tree as quickly as he could. He fussed and cursed under his breath. Why didn't the animals wake him up? Or the light? The noises of the farm always wake me up in the morning. The livestock must be starving. To George's surprise, the cattle were munching on hay that someone put in their feed stalls that morning. The chickens, including the rooster, were all pecking away at their feed, and the hogs were eating corn and molasses. "Hello!" George yelled. "Someone's here. Who is it?" "Relax, George, it's just me," a female voice said. He rubbed his eyes as she came toward him from the east. The sun at her back made it hard for him to see who it was, but he knew Molly's voice. "Molly? What are you doing here? I haven't heard from you in 5 years, George." Actually, it was 2. The last time I heard from you was 2 years ago. He could tell she was irritable. "What are you mad at me for?" George asked. "I've been back from my trip to Europe for a year. I kept telling the folks it's time George gets out of that place and starts acting his age." "I'm almost 40, Molly. How old do you think I should act?" "Well, you're not dead, and you're still going up that dang treehouse." She shook her finger, and "Before you ask, my parents could see that light coming from here every night." She stood in front of him with her hands on her hips. "I've been in the house. It's clean enough, but since those beds haven't been made since your parents died, I'm sure there isn't bound to be much of a mess, is there? I did find some dishes and a pan on the stove. I washed them up, so at least I know you're eating in there. You look fairly clean, so you must be bathing in the house, too." "Wait!" George waved his hands in front of his face frantically. What gives? I haven't seen you in years. You haven't come around, and now you're here and getting nosy in my house, feeding my stock. What else? Do you want an instant proposal or something?" "No, I want an instant wedding, you fool." "What?" "Gotcha with that one." Molly let out a belly laugh. "I love the look on your face. Come in the house. I've made some bacon and eggs and some fried potatoes." "Now that makes up for the long nose of yours." George's mouth started watering. They sat in the old kitchen table eating breakfast. Actually, they sat at it, but whatever. "Do you still remember how to salsa?" Molly broke the silence. "Salsa? Molly, I barely learned that night of the prom, and I haven't done it since." "Fiesta was our thing, remember? That's why we got so colorful with the orange and played maracas. Yesterday, I was thinking about all that time ago. I've married and divorced. I have one little boy, but I'm still young. We're too old to be letting our lives go like this." She took a bite of bacon, chewed, and swallowed. "You remember when I brought Sammy out here 2 years ago? I think he must have been about 7 then. He really enjoyed his time with you." Where's his dad? He left the day after he found out I was pregnant. You never told me that. Well, no, I wouldn't have, would I? Molly hung her head. Why are we both so alone? I just never felt like seeing anyone else. And after my folks died, I just didn't much care for anything but keeping the farm up. I haven't really had time for much else. Tomorrow night, will you take me to the town dance? Molly asked. Everyone will be surprised to see you. I doubt it. Not once they see I'm with you, George snickered. I don't think anyone doubts that you'd take no for an answer. Molly smiled. That's true. 3 months after the dance, Molly and George were married on the farm. Sammy stood with George, who wore the orange tuxedo, although the bride did wear white, a white bridal gown. She wore an orange garter and orange toenail polish with the sandals. Her bouquet, it was orange, of course. There weren't any orchids, but the florist tinted a few carnations with orange food dye in the water, threw in a little baby's breath, and tied it up with lace. They had the perfect farm-style wedding for a Kansas couple starting out. 2 years later, they presented Sammy with a little sister. They called her Orchid. Oh, one last thing. The dance at their wedding, they danced the salsa after taking a refresher course at a local studio. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed today's story. And we don't always do stories. We do a lot of different things, but I do like to do stories. So I'll probably be coming up with even more elements for another one before too long. And Carla has sent me her story that she wrote, and I will be going through that and presenting it before too long. So if you have not subscribed, please do so, and give me a thumbs up if you liked what you heard. I hope it's the kind of story a family can enjoy. That's what I aim for. So tomorrow's another day, and I'm planning on being here, so hasta mañana.